Play back a melody in your mind, but pick the oldest one you know. A tune that's been passed down through generations. Imagine how it used to be played, used to be sung by those who first gave it life. Now, if you can, reimagine it. Bring it up to speed with modernity, electrify it, bounce it with a beat. Although remixed, that little melody still carries with it some of its past, some of its roots. Music can tell us a lot about time, and technically speaking, music is time. It can even be considered a living archive evolving in the speed of the present. And what happens when that living musical archive is not only key in holding on to the culture that shaped it to be, but also the means for creating something yet to come? Just how does music bridge the old and the new while influencing who we are today, practically speaking? Welcome back to another episode of Music on the Move. I'm your host, Savannah Fortis, and today we're going to answer that question by example of a small country with a very prominent past and a burgeoning future. Armenia, a tiny nation of just under 3 million inhabitants nestled into the mountainous region of the Caucasus, straddling Europe and Asia. While this region of the world is home to two of the oldest countries in history, Armenia and Georgia, it was also the host of last year's World Congress on Innovation and Technology in October 2024, which brought people from all over the world to Armenia's capital city, Yerevan, to discuss emerging technologies that will shape the future. And I was one of those people. Now, I know what you're thinking. Innovation and technology are not the first things you think of when you think of Armenia. They certainly weren't for me. If you are even familiar with Armenia, your first thought is probably synonymous with the Soviet Union. Maybe you've heard of the tragic Armenian genocide of 1915. If you're familiar with world music, perhaps you know of the double reed woodwind instrument, the Duduk, which we've been hearing play throughout the beginning of this episode. Nonetheless, before my arrival to report on the conference, I had questions about how a place so steeped in history and culture, things rooted in the past, could tie together innovation and technology. Topics rooted, if you will, in the future. But I was eager to find out, and one panel in particular at the Congress could possibly be my answer, or at least my starting point. Orchestrating the Future, the Impact of Artificial Intelligence on the Music Industry. The room was packed, a massive turnout, and mostly of young, college-aged people eager to hear what the country's leading voices all had to say on the topic. But before we go any further, let's pause here for a moment to talk about this topic. Music and artificial intelligence is a subject matter that I actually have quite a bit of experience reporting on from my day job as a tech and culture journalist. Since the advent of easily accessible AI, as made a sensation by ChatGPT back in November 2022, I've spoken to dozens of experts around the world about AI's role in the music industry. This includes one-on-one interviews with the current CEO of the Grammys, major mainstream artists and producers, new music tech startups, and AI developers themselves. All of these conversations have taken different angles. For example, what AI can offer to artists in their creative process, and, of course, artists' own fears and concerns of replacement. The latter being a common conversation I have with musician friends. Sentiments like, well, everything I do will be obsolete soon because AI will be able to do it and faster. A valid concern of anyone staring into the eyes of a new, powerful technology marketed as a friend of efficiency. Walking into this event, I was sure I would hear echoes of the same concerns, but moreover, was wondering how this event in Armenia, of all places, could offer me something new to chew on. And for most of the panel, I sat nodding along with recycled talking points. However, something was said at the very end that did give me some food for thought. The Armenian singer and producer Nick Egibon recalled an experience in the studio in which he witnessed an AI do work rivaling his own and humbly expressed sincere worries of imminent replacement by machine. The panel fell quiet for a moment, certainly empathizing with the artist. However, Dr. Matthias Ruder, an award-winning music and technology strategist who is the director of the Beethoven AI project, asked if he could offer some consolation.
I'll be brief. First of all, I think it's beautiful that you say that the AI can do it on the same level as you do. But I also would like to take away the fear from you, because I do believe that we're just going through this phase where music is changing tremendously. Remember when you go to a museum and you see a Jackson Pollock painting, and a lot of us have probably thought, like, I could do the same. Yeah, you could, but you didn't. You didn't. And this is the thing, and now we hear a great song and we say, oh, I could do the same. Yes, but you didn't. You didn't have the idea, you didn't have the vision, and this is what being an artist is all about. And the AI is not taking that away from us.
The idea, the vision, is human manifested. These ideas and visions often come from a very deep place within us, a place I like to call the soul. And that soul, that's what makes the artist. That's what makes the art. The soul is what will enforce the wedge between human creators and their machine counterparts. That final thought from the panel lingered in my head as I headed upstairs to the press room to prepare for an interview. I had booked some time with one of the Armenian panelists. It was my opportunity to dig a little deeper into the well-trodden topic, but from the perspective of this small little nation. Sergei Spatyan, a very well-known Armenian composer and conductor. Youthful and forward-thinking, he's responsible for keeping the flame burning in the youth of Armenia for classical music and the country's own composers. Sergei came in, dressed in a well-tailored suit and an air of confidence. He gave me a kind smile, shook my hand, and leaned forward, eager to unpack the topic. He started, "For Armenian kids, music is the second alphabet."
For us, art and knowledge linked with art, that's the way how we are trying to keep our identity. It's hard to be small, and especially if you can understand all the problems of Armenia. It's hard to speak about development and try to just keep this line and also keep, identity. And I think that with all circumstances, we have kind of success in this agenda.
Do you see music as a way forward for a lot of young people in that sense?
Definitely, yeah. It's a tool to move us forward.
Definitely.
Music is not a luxury thing, so music is the identity, and music can unite.
On that note, Sergei began to share with me one of his earliest encounters with AI in music in a professional setting. An encounter which forced him to confront a question he had never fully answered. What makes Armenian music Armenian? Of course, ethnomusicologists and Armenian music specialists could certainly identify structural and audible components of Armenian music. This goes without saying. Sergei was asking something different. If you wanted an AI to produce Armenian compositions as an output, at least functionally, what musical components must be included as inputs to train AI to make something sincerely Armenian? In other words, what structural musical component, be it an interval, melodic motif, harmonics, couldn't be left out or else not sound truly Armenian? To find out, over months of an experimentation period, Sergey and his team fed advanced AI models over 2,000 scores of Armenian sacred chants called sharakans, music deeply tied to Armenia's culture and spiritual identity. At first, the results were chaotic. The machine didn't understand what to keep, what to discard, its output never really quite nailing the task. But after months of refining the input, Sergey and his team cracked it. They pinpointed that a seventh diminished structure was always present in the output that was deemed to be, quote, Armenian music. Without it, all other outputs would miss the mark. This tiny yet powerful musical trait has been woven through centuries of tradition, but never formally articulated in Armenian society as its defining characteristic. After nailing the formula for Armenian music, Sergey conducted an orchestra of Armenian musicians who were being fed a live-time, AI-generated piece of music to play on the spot in concert, which you can watch on YouTube. It was the first of its kind in Armenia and something Sergey said he was proud to be a part of. Though he made sure to stress to me that the AI-generated music was functionally Armenian, kind of nodding to the truth that it lacked the human spirit and lived experience that truly define music. For Sergey, the introduction of this new technology wasn't about replacing human creativity, it was about using it to expose the hidden architecture of a musical heritage, revealing patterns that had always been there.
What I imagine for Armenian young generation, if they will admire and understand that the music is the part of DNA, because for young generation they are always taking things the granted. So the respect of the traditions will help us, and digital world can make this task easier with kind of easier delivery.
And little did I know, across town, I was about to stumble upon two examples of just what Sergey hopes for the future of the country. Two young Armenian musicians who are walking the line between tradition and newness, past and future, in the present. There's a little cube sticking out from the side of a building. It's a sign, illuminated by blue neon lights, that reads Tone Lab. It hangs over the beginning of a flight of steps that lead down to a door. And there, inside that door, is where the magic happens. A classic underground venue for the next generation that could easily be found in most European countries. But for Yerevan, it was one of the first of its kind.
Set myself in my head.
And to welcome me when I arrived, aside from the semi-angsty sound of Armenian youth, was Armen Yerigarian, a young Armenian musician and co-founder of the space. I was interested in Tone Lab, not necessarily because it deals with any groundbreaking emerging technology like Sergey and his orchestra, rather because it's a place that is fostering another type of straddling between past and future. More than just a rehearsal and recording space, Tone Lab is a creative incubator. It hosts concerts, supports new musical acts, and provides a home base for young artists. The event that night was called Rise and Shine, with the aim to do exactly that. Moreover, many of these upcoming musicians congregating around Tone Lab are blending traditional Armenian musical components and instruments with prog rock and sometimes even metal, crafting a sound that's both deeply rooted and boldly modern. Many of the bands associated with Tone Lab fall into prog folk or ethnic prog, including Armen's own group, Rozen Tal. And while the music of the alternative scene in Armenia has clear parallels with some of the great prog rock icons like King Crimson or the Armenian-American heavy metal group System of a Down, the ethnic sparkle these new groups are adding is intentional.
It has never been this important like today. That's how I feel. I don't want to go into any bigger issues like geopolitical issues, but we've been struggling to keep our identity for centuries. That's no secret, and we need to preserve it in the purest form, I guess.
Armen explained to me that after being locked away during the pandemic, as was the rest of the world, he was eager, in his own words, to breathe life back into the local music scene. And that's exactly what he did. Armin and his buddies started organizing concerts with some of the biggest groups in the country, and soon it became obvious that these musicians needed proper places to organize and rehearse. Thus, after some trial and error on the running a business part, Tone Lab was born. The incubation part of Tone Lab started shortly thereafter, after Armin also recognized the hunger in the next generation to express their identity musically.
I think music is one of the ways, and it's the strongest way, because it speaks directly to the soul. You know, everybody has feelings. I'm saying this has never been this much important, because I see that most of the population had lost the sense of who they are, and they don't even care to find out who they have been.
But Armenia is also a unique case. It's a tiny landlocked nation, laden with an ancient past, like a treasure chest that its people have spent generations trying to protect. Georgia to the north, Azerbaijan to the east, Turkey to the west, Iran to the south. Armenian cultural DNA carries traces of many influences from all of its neighbors, yet it remains uniquely its own. Armin emphasized to me that preserving the Armenian essence in music, even when reimagined with new sounds, is key to guarding this treasure chest.
When you don't know who you are and what you want, you just take what you're given and go where you're taken. I'm saying it because we are, as a state, as a country, we are in a pretty difficult situation, surrounded by different nations, people of different religion. I mean, in an ideal world, that would be no problem, right? But it turns out to be a problem. We've lived on this ground for centuries, on this land for centuries, thousands of years, and we happen to manage it through so many disasters and catastrophes, and we are still here speaking our own language, playing our own music, and it's up to us how the things are turning out in the future. And I can feel it deeply, and actually that's what drives us forward. What future do we envision for us and the next generations? That's why it's never been this important.
The next morning, on the second floor of a coffee shop in downtown Yerevan, I was ruminating over all of these encounters so far, slowly piecing together a picture of Armenia. At some point, though, I stepped away to the bathroom, still a little lost in thought. As I sat there, as one does, I happened to glance up, and there, stuck to the wall, straight in my line of sight, was a sticker that read, "Sound Enthusiastic Community." I couldn't have made this up. Sound enthusiasts. Did I find my next community while sitting on the toilet? Well, just a few more moments of sitting there was enough for me to find them on Instagram and discover, to my delight, that the sound enthusiastic community of Yerevan just happened to be holding the city's first ever Festival for the Sonic Arts that same exact week. So obviously, the fate of the rest of my time in Armenia was etched into stone. I got up and headed straight there. The Hay Arts Center is in the heart of Yerevan and promotes itself as a creative hub, a modern platform to promote culture and creative industries in Armenia. Hay Art is like a portal between eras, with its brutalistic concrete exterior bearing the weight of Armenia's Soviet history, while inside, A raw, creative energy reverberates through its walls. The layout of the center is broken into multiple circular rooms with winding levels of installations. Upon entering the main doors, a set of stairs takes you up and over into the subsequent circular chamber where the Festival for the Sonic Arts began to take shape. Sound artists were manipulating raw materials, playing with their vibrations, while components of speakers connected by wires were strung across the air, emitting a potpourri of white noise, birds chirping, and synthetic little bleeps that decorated the atmosphere like a sonic wonderland. And in a little back room on the ground floor, there was a collection of curators and participants plugged into synthesizers and control boards, making audio magic. Individuals from a handful of different countries who found themselves in Yerevan among like-minded sound enthusiasts. And there I met Varujan Chatiryan, a young Swiss-Armenian composer, musician, sound artist, curator, and, of course, founder of the Festival for the Sonic Arts in Yerevan. After our intros, he briefly walked me through the exhibition, showing me the various rooms like the acoustimonium, installations, and artists who were on duty managing the art. Until that point, as we made our way through the exhibition, I felt like I was experiencing the furthest edge of Armenia's youth-driven musical experimentation, surely the most avant-garde. And this was true, at least also according to Varujan, who described how this format of sound art and experimental music was, until recently, unfamiliar to Armenia. This was something that was carefully considered when he was curating the festival. Varujan wanted it to be as integrated as possible with the local community.
I need to be careful of how I do a festival on an art form that is, let's say, some individuals did experiments in Armenia, but it's not a major thing. Sound art is not a thing. They never had a festival about that. So how to make a festival that don't feels like I'm imposing or importing an art from outside, and then people come here, just look at this like pieces and think, oh, great, that's how they do it in Europe, you know? So the whole concept of the festival was to involve as many people coming from different range from the music scene. So the idea was really to be inclusive and to get the ravers, to get the classical musician guys, to get the jazz musicians, to all together, instead of like importing and showcasing art form from outside, try to discover together what sound art could be in Armenia.
So what is sound art in Armenia? At its core, it carries the same essence I found in the emerging music groups at Tone Lab and in Sergey's AI exploration, a deep connection to roots. It's about preserving what makes a culture unique while allowing it to evolve, using sound as both an anchor and a tool for transformation. And to speak to this exactly, the event incorporates what Varujan calls soundwalks. Soundwalks invite you into someone's sonic world, how they hear their lives. Each one unfolds like an intimate map, tracing the rhythms and sounds that shape a person's daily experience. The elements chosen, be it street noise, distant music, fragments of conversation, all represent a unique walk of life tied to personal history and the environments they've moved through.
The soundwalks are very important components of the festival. So when I wanted to think about how to talk about sound art, like sound art is a huge and very polymorphic name. It's new and there are a lot of things inside. So as a first edition, I wanted to talk about different aspects that sounds can be powerful too. And soundwalks are focusing on the political aspect of sound. In Armenia, these last years, we experienced tremendous change. Armenia is usually historically an emigration country. By historically, I mean after the fall of the Soviet Union. Brains went out, country was in a bad shape in the 90s. It's a common story for most of the countries which were under the Soviet Empire. But the last 10 years, that's really changed for geopolitical reasons. First, the Arab Spring and the wars in the Middle East. There is a huge Armenian community in the Middle East. So those people, after the Arab Spring, came to Armenia. It wasn't their country, but they were speaking Armenian and they were diasporic Armenian. So they brought with them new knowledge, new food, new musical instruments, like a new diversity. Then a few years later, the Russians invaded Ukraine. And with that war, a lot of Russians, young Russians, which didn't want to die for this crazy dictatorship and this useless invasion, who didn't want to serve in the army, who wanted to have a future. A lot of them went to Georgia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Serbia, if they could. So that's another immigration that happened in Armenia. And then the third one are Indians. Since 5 years, we have a huge and growing Indian community in Armenia who come to study, to work, very low-paid jobs, delivery, helping in the stores. So in short, the cultural and demographic landscape of Armenia changed a lot. And those soundwalks wanted to talk about that, to try to make these communities have voices so the other communities could hear them. Meaning that the Indians don't speak so much with the Armenians. If you see in the street, they are visible, you recognize them, but you don't see them so involved or integrated in this in-between communities. There is no public space where people actually meet and talk. Sometimes they don't even talk the same language. So each soundwalk is actually the story of one of those migrants. One story is from this Russian Armenian, one story is from a Syrian Armenian woman, and one is from Indian architect. And each soundwalk, we go through the streets that are important for them. We hear how they leave Yerevan, how they felt the contrast between the country they are coming from and the country they arrive. And I believe that's a really important narrative to avoid racism or xenophobia in 10 years. If people start now to talk to each other, they will know each other and we won't have social problems. At least that's a hope. That's an intention.
But for Varujan, migration is not only a societal phenomenon, it's deeply personal. Having grown up in Switzerland as a part of the larger Armenian diaspora, he carries the dual perspective of both an insider and an outsider. His journey underscores the very idea behind the soundwalks, that listening to the stories of those who have arrived, through the sounds that shape their lives, can bridge the gaps between communities and foster empathy.
The notion of diaspora is that you're part of a language, a culture, a nation, but you're not on your territory. That means the institutions of the countries you're living in are not speaking your language, they're not fostering your culture, they're basically doing nothing for that identity. So you need to self-organize your identity. You need to, through communities, friends, or the private space. And for me, being Armenian in Europe, the cultural part always took a very important dimension. Books and music were the space where I would feel connected to that identity. Of course, friends too, which spoke Armenian. But for me, definitely, my musical journey, I believe, is very much impacted by this. And in a way, I realized through the year that this is a broader pattern. Actually, I could even say now that most of the diasporic Armenian people, they love Armenian traditional instruments, and they actually want to blend those with electronic music. Or for me, as a diasporic Armenian, those instruments, they remind me of my childhood, they remind me this identity.
Varujan's words resonate far beyond his personal experience. They reflect a larger pattern that connects diasporic communities across cultures, continents, and generations. When you're separated from a homeland, culture isn't something that passively surrounds you anymore. It becomes something you have to actively seek out, reconstruct, and reinterpret. Books, language, music, these become the bridges between past and present, between belonging and longing. And that act of reconstruction, of blending tradition with the new, is exactly what I found throughout my entire time in Yerevan. It's there in the musicians at Tone Lab, who weave Armenian folk motifs into prog rock and metal. It's in Sergey's AI experiments, exploring the essence of Armenian sound in the digital age. It's in the soundwalks, where migration stories unfold through the city's streets, turning personal memory into a shared experience. What I discovered wasn't just the evolution of Armenian music, but a deeper truth about sound itself. Sound is a memory, and it's a movement. It's an evolving archive of who we are and where we've been, whether through the reverberations of an ancient instrument, the hum of a city absorbing new voices, or the experimental compositions pushing boundaries of tradition, Armenia's soundscape is alive and shaped by its past, but never bound by it. I'm Savannah Fortis, and that was another episode of Music on the Move. As always, there are so many wonderful humans to thank who helped make this episode possible. First, big shout out to Artak and all of his colleagues for giving me a great experience at the World Congress and for setting up some fantastic interviews. Sergey, Armin, Varujan, and many others that I met along the way in the streets, at the shows, in music shops. Per usual, if you're interested in further listening, there is a Spotify playlist complimentary to the episode linked in the description. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and check out our website for even more details about the episodes, photos, and other fun stuff. Thank you so much for joining me for yet another journey. Stay tuned for more, and until then, keep your ears open, listening, and exploring. This episode of Music on the Move was written and produced by me, Savannah Fortis, with Music on the Move theme song composed by Daphne Farazi.